Reflexivity is a concept we've borrowed from Margaret Archer. It refers to how we prioritise, weigh up, make decisions and take action within particular contexts. There are always interrelated influences on what and how we decide what to do, including when we're teaching. Our own motivations and knowledge and beliefs, the everyday systems and resources at our disposal, and the expectations and norms of the group or institution. We can bring a reflexive approach to consideration of all kinds of questions or contexts. How to teach reading, how to engage parents, or how to teach for diversity in classrooms. We used reflexivity with epistemic cognition to develop an approach based on epistemic reflexivity. And then we used that to ask questions about how we can best prepare future teachers for the classrooms of today.
I'll break it down as I understand it in terms of a sort of process or stages of this decision-making process. For me, it's a listing of kind of priorities that we have and multiple knowledge priorities, like what type of knowledge do we want to foster or ascertain in a learning environment. There's a deliberation, so there's the discernment, there's deliberation around it. Where does it sit in that list? And then there's at least an initial decision about what perhaps we would refer to as an epistemic aim, but what is the knowledge aim that we're trying to attain through the experience for ourselves, but also for our students. And what I've realized, well, at least what I think, is that there's a gap between that decision and then the action. And so epistemic cognition is a thinking process, but then there's between making that decision, there is space between decision and action. And that actually allows us to go back into those initial phases and continuously change it until we actually engage in a behavior. And so it's extremely complex because we have, as teachers, we have multiple knowledge aims. Because we talk a lot about learning intentions and success criteria in teacher education, I think using that as a context to ground epistemic aims, if we think about what teachers would typically list as a learning intention, might be, I was previously a science teacher, so maybe it's for our students to understand a particular scientific concept and to be able to apply a certain practical skill. And so within those two intentions, there's a knowledge aim within both of those. So our learning intentions tend to be quite explicit to some degree, not always. And so that's perhaps a nice hook to link in epistemic aims. But I think the gap is helping pre-service teachers understand all the epistemic aims that sit outside of the learning intentions that we actually hold. So teachers are juggling quite a lot of knowledge and information and priorities, I think, in terms of their own teaching practice and the way they approach a classroom or a lesson. And that in itself requires quite a number of decisions, micro decisions, from the minute they start thinking about what it is they want to teach or what type of learning experience they're trying to craft. They have to weigh up all the different bodies of knowledge, but also the pressures or perceived pressures from a range of kind of internal and external kind of spaces. And so from an external space, we've got curriculum, there's subject area specifically, we've got general capabilities or school vision, mission, values, strategic intent. These are different bodies of knowledge in a very contextual space that they are also managing. They've got their own beliefs and their own values that are coming into that. And in this decision-making process, all these things are potentially coming up on their sort of perhaps conscious or subconscious radar. Like they're listed there, and then they're going through. I call that kind of discernment, this kind of listing of all the possible projects and avenues. And then a teacher has to, in their decision-making process, they're deliberating which of these actually, for this particular class in this particular context, which of these is most valuable, important, necessary, and they're engaging in this kind of prioritization process. And then usually the way I conceive of it is that as they're designing their lesson plan, they're actually starting to make some of those decisions, and they're going, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to teach it. This is the type of experience I'm trying to create. And then so I think usually we refer to this as kind of discernment, listing, deliberation, this kind of conversation, this internal conversation where we start to prioritise. And then there's dedication. But I've actually kind of broken dedication up into two, because I think there's an initial form of dedication, which putting it down in a lesson plan or some sort of written commitment almost. And then there's the time between lesson plan and classroom, which I then call the actual deed. And I think that can change. So my initial decision can almost force me back into a loop of kind of thinking and epistemic reflexivity almost, that can then essentially change what actually happens in the end at the classroom level. And I think that's what's beautiful, isn't it? That there's this kind of process is drawing together all these different bodies of knowledge, internal and external, and we're making these micro decisions that ultimately manifest in some sort of classroom experience.
In both our national survey and the case study data, we've found a link between epistemic reflexivity and teaching for diversity. To teach for diversity rather than to and about diversity, teacher educators need to focus on the epistemic aspects of their teaching and learning, not just how to teach or what to teach. We don't want pre-service teachers to simply accept knowledge, but rather engage in evaluative epistemic aims to take into account competing theories and personal perspectives, and to push back against their assumptions, biases and stereotypes. This is the stuff of being critical and evaluative in supporting diverse groups of children in the classroom.
So one of the relationships we focused on was the connection between teacher educators' epistemic aims, and this is for pre-service teachers, and the teaching practices they engaged in. So teacher educators' epistemic aims related to both knowledge and understanding or critical connections predicted the teaching practice related to teaching approaches that encourage discussion and debate in a supportive environment. Teacher educators who placed greater importance on epistemic aims related to understanding or making critical connections were more likely to place greater importance on critical pedagogies in their teaching practices. So another relationship we looked at was between the epistemic aims and the reflexivity of teacher educators. And here, teacher educators who placed more importance on epistemic aims related to critical connections, for example, for pre-service teachers to develop deep understandings about teaching for diversity, were more likely to report engagement and reflexivity in the context of preparing pre-service teachers to teach diverse learners. Teacher educators who placed greater importance on epistemic aims related to knowledge, for example, for pre-service teachers to know that all learners differ in some way, reported engaging in reflexivity less often. So an aim of understanding as making critical connections predicted reflexivity across all three factors more so than an aim of knowledge.
So epistemic reflexivity for teaching for diversity, it's not a simple concept, but it's a really powerful one. So our overarching goal is to draw upon different bodies of knowledge so that we can work not only to identify the forms and the sources of educational and social injustice, which we already know a fair bit about, but so we can go beyond identification to actually challenging and contesting the beliefs that produce those injustices again and again and again. So it's it's like a relentless quest to identify, to draw attention to, and to get beyond that status quo. So we're always trying to focus on things that have been out of focus. We're trying to make the strange familiar. We're trying to make the familiar strange. We're trying to generate that sense of possibility. We're really trying to create hope for all our children.
So the first thing that they tended to start with was, what is it we're trying to achieve here? What are we trying to learn? Or what are we trying to teach the students, depending on the point of the unit we're up to? Their next step was then to share openly with the group, and there was a real sense of equality of contribution. That included myself as well, as the facilitator. I guess the big point of a yarning circle as being part of that yarning methodology is that it needs to be equal contribution amongst the group, and while someone may have more knowledge in a particular area, it's important that all perspectives are heard and all experiences are heard. So basically we'd go around, everyone would have their say on the topic area at hand, and then from there was a bit more of a natural flow in the yarning, in bouncing off people's ideas and experiences and what they'd come across, or an idea that I shared with the group. And so I guess that second step of equality and sharing is really, really important. And it opens us to a bit more of that idea of deep listening a little bit as well, and to be able to take in everyone else's experience in a particular area allowed them to build off what everyone else was saying.
So I think those teachers that do that well are constantly going through a process of reflection, but they take it beyond reflection to be more reflexive. Okay, so they now are putting into action. So it's all well and good, I've got all of this, I'm reflecting, that was a good day, I made sure such and such was, they had the individual learning plan, we achieved all of that. And that's reflection, that's great. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? And so that reflexive need to put things into action, not only as one-offs, but as a long-term considered approach is necessary. And those teachers that do it well, they're amazing, because you can see that authentic forward, looking to the horizon, thinking about their learners in that journey, but also they're the ones that include the learners in the conversation. And I think they're the impactful educators. So it's great to reflect, but we need to move to the next stage of putting reflection into actions.
So through our research, our case study participants and our social lab participants have all been invited to teach about their own work as educators. And we've been asking them to explain how in their day-to-day practices they bring together that framework which combines the understanding of teaching about for diversity with an understanding of epistemic cognition and a commitment to reflexivity. So look, just as a side note, I think sometimes it feels like we need to have almost magical powers to teach for diversity, that there is some sort of superhuman pedagogical strategies or decision making that is required. But actually the magic and the power comes from the everyday questions that we ask. It's those everyday questions that open up new ways of thinking critically and reflexively about diversity. So some questions, for example, that have evaluative epistemic aims showing critical reflection are the ones that are as simple as who's actually included or excluded here, who's being valued or devalued, who's getting shown as powerful, who's getting shown as competent or incompetent, who's being rewarded, who's being punished, who's being ignored, what overall is being shown as natural and normal, what is shown as other or abnormal, what's actually being excluded, where are the gaps, where are the silences, how does this relate to other texts, is it part of a pattern? All those kinds of questions can make visible the assumptions that we're working with, and that doesn't require magic, that just requires reflexivity and a willingness to teach for diversity.
Teaching for diversity is enabled by deliberate decision making, which has epistemic aims at its core. We all have a role to play, regardless of the subject matter that we're teaching.
Once we get to that understanding of diversity and understanding of how to support teachers to work for diversity, then I can't help but think the amazing possibilities for all the students. Because if we are able to work well and serve and include these students who have been so marginalised, then imagine the amazing skills and possibilities for everybody else in our classes.
We know it's hard. We know teacher education is under pressure. We know there are limits on our time and resources and energy and even our own knowledge when we try to address our epistemic aims for teaching for diversity. But we also know that we can come together and implement change. We propose a call to action for teacher educators around the world. Where do we start? First, we need more intersectional diversity research in teacher education to increase our evidence base for this work. We argue, using our evidence from this project, that an increased focus on teacher educators' epistemic cognition can provide a way to shift thinking and knowing about diversity. We recommend more opportunities for teacher educators to engage in collaborative professional learning and planning to increase knowledge and skills about teaching diversity, based on research rather than simply on experience. And finally, teacher educators need to interrogate their own knowledge and practices by engaging in both an individual and a shared process of epistemic reflexivity about this critical area of our work, teaching for diversity. This is an ongoing project, and we hope you'll join us.